Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So, alhamdulillah, I am now in Birmingham, in Sheikh Asrar Rashid's house, who has read my book. He picked up a copy last year and has read it through. So we decided to sit down and have a discussion about it and discuss the more salient points therein.
Firstly, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ahlan wa sahlan to our brother Mahdi Luck. And yes, your book, I studied the entire book, read the book cover to cover, and what I found interesting was what you mentioned regarding Islam surviving in what you term, well, the term Anglosphere is an old term. I've heard intellectuals use that term also, but you've popularized this more amongst Muslim circles, the term Anglosphere. What you mentioned regarding Islam surviving in the West, that you see no future for Muslims in the West. So that was more or less the conclusion of the entire book.
Yeah. So I'll have to expand on that. Okay, actually, first of all, regarding the term Anglosphere, I got that term from Daniel Hannan, he's a conservative MEP. I believe he's one who actually coined the term, but he was using it back in 2014, I think it was. He wrote a book called How We Invented Freedom, and he was talking about Anglosphere, because we call this term Anglosphere because he talked about how the English went out and populated these areas, what is now Canada, the United States,
Australia, and New
Zealand. So those 5 countries, those are the English-speaking countries. And then he would argue further and say that like what we call globalization is really Angloblization, because we see people around the world wearing suits and ties. The suit and ties were originally an English thing. People are using English as their medium of like their lingua franca and day-to-day activities. So it's more of an Anglicizing of the world, as opposed to like a Europeanizing or a Westernizing of the world. That's the first thing. Now, as for the future of Islam in the West, I'm basing a lot of that, because what we have in the book for readers who have come across that chapter is what I call these 4 abominations, which were starting with fiqh minorities in 2001. So when Imam Muhammad Siddiq al-Bulti made that pronouncement, the first one, there's 2 ones, there's 2001, 2003. The first one he made in 2001, and this was after organizations based in Europe like
European Fiqh Council.
Yeah, the European Fatwa Council. Yeah. Which again, that's something else that Imam al-Bulti has commented on, because not everyone on that panel is actually mufti. So you can't call it a Fatwa Council, because if you're going to call something a Fatwa Council or a Fiqh Council, then everyone on that panel should be a mufti or a faqih. The same way if you had like medical council, everyone should be a doctor, right? So he said at that time that if prior to this time we thought that Islam was the fastest growing religion in the West, that it was just spreading like fire, everyone was embracing it, but then we realized this fiqh minorities is rearing its head. That means that Islam is now being subsumed into the dominant Western culture, and it's losing its identity. It's just going to be dissolved. And he said that if we allow this to happen, you're going to get different Islams, local Islams. You'll have like a British Islam, an American Islam, a Canadian Islam, a French Islam, whatever it is, and they'll be totally unrecognizable they'll be totally, I should say, distinguished from the Islam you find in the Muslim heartlands. So he was making this pronouncement back in 2001. And the other thing he pointed out is he quoted Surah An-Nisa in 97, where Allah talks about hijrah. It's not Allah's earth vast enough so they make hijrah in it. So he said, if you ever have a problem implementing your faith in what is Dar al-Kufr, like a dominant, a land that is dominated by the unbelievers, then you leave. That's the solution. You don't change the laws just to fit where you are.
With regard to minority fiqh, it was introduced not only by the European Fatwa Council, but other intellectuals as well in the West. Yeah. But I would say it's not picked up in the UK as quick as it has picked up in other countries like the US.
Yeah, maybe not in name, but you see this sort of
trend.
This sort of trend, right, where we're now getting the point of, say, women leading prayers, then we get, homosexual marriages.
Amina Wadud came early 2004 or around 2005. She came to the UK in Oxford and she led a few dozen men in prayer. And there was some imam in Oxford, based in Oxford, who actually went to South Africa and opened a masjid in Cape Town, open to homosexuals and people who pronounce homosexuality as being permitted in Islam. Otherwise, all masajid are open to
everyone.
But saying that homosexuality is permitted in Islam is disbelief, kufr. So there are some people who are now pronouncing that as permitted, but that wouldn't fall into the parameters of minority fiqh as outlaid by Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya or others.
Not explicitly, but what I'm getting at is once you start that sort of principle where you say, okay, we're in the West and there are different circumstances and therefore we have to create different rules and different rulings, that opens the door for other stuff to come along later. So you can start off with which the things that they did. For example, they started off with the whole thing about mortgages, right? Saying it was perfectly halal to get a mortgage because because you're in the UK or the US, you're now in al-Harb, right? They totally abuse like this is from Hanafi method.
لا ربا بين الحرب ومسلم لا ربا بين حربي ومسلم في دار الحرب. At the end of every bab al-riba in the Hanafi fiqh works, you'll find that is the last sentence. So you check Sharh al-Wiqaya, you check al-Ikhtiyar, you check all these works, they have that. And Al-Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he based that ruling on a mursal hadith. So the Shafi'is, when they respond to this, they respond by saying the hadith is mursal and whatnot.
Cut off,
But the meaning of the ruling is that a Muslim is allowed to benefit from the disbeliever. So in the Hashiyah of Ibn Abdin, he mentions that if the Muslim takes a dinar and gives away 2 dinars, so he's giving away more and taking less. Some people are under the impression, and I think Sarakhsi mentions this in Al-Mabsut also, that this means the Muslim can give riba. But what they are referring to there is that in the old days they had inferior dinars and dinars which were pure gold. So the Muslim is taking a pure gold dinar and giving away inferior quality dinars. So he's benefiting from the transaction. So some of them attempted to say the riba transactions that occur now in the West with mortgages would fall under this ruling. So basing that on the Darul Harb basis. But additional to that, some of them said it's permitted out of darura because of the legal maxim of darurat tubih al-mahfurat. So those are 2 different things. Meaning if the darura necessity is such that a person, if he does not take out a mortgage, he will live on the roads, or his family will be moved to a place where they will be harmed, then that person is permitted in that circumstance to carry out a riba based transaction. But if you base the ruling on saying that there's no riba between a Muslim and a Harbi in Darul Harb, then that would permit all types of riba transactions without any parameters, without looking at particular circumstances. But the reality is that ruling is referring to when the Muslim benefits in the transaction with the non-Muslim, not when the Muslim is harmed. So then some of them attempt to reinterpret that by saying if you rent for a long time, in the long run you will benefit only if you buy the property, not if you rent the property. But how this relates to minority fiqh, what is called fiqh al-aqalliyat, which is a new term as well, the term is new, is in reality what fiqh al-aqalliyat should be renamed is fiqh al-dururat.
Yeah.
Meaning, what's the difference between looking at the darurat, necessities, and hawa'ij,
Yeah.
essentials of
Yeah,
people's
but this is what
lives?
Imam Abulti made in his statement. The point he made, I mean, well, actually, let's go back to the previous point again about Dar al-Harb, is that, like, the UK or Europe, and it's not Dar al-Harb, it's Dar al-Kufr. It's not Dar al-Harb because Muslims are not being persecuted here. We're not in a war zone here.
But even that, when they use the term Darul Harb in the fiqh works, they use the term Darul Harb as a broad term. Within Darul Harb, even though the word Harb is used, it's used because nations could potentially go to war. But all of Darul Kufr would fall under the rubric of Darul.
I think we see it differently in the Shafi madhab.
No, they'd use the term loosely.
Well, we would say Dar al-Harb, Dar al-Kufr is the broader aspect. That's where the unbelievers rule, and Dar al-Harb is that part of Dar al-Kufr where Muslims are being oppressed and persecuted.
What they in the Hanafi fiqh works, what they mean when they say the term Dar al-Harb is any land which is governed by disbelievers, governed, and that's it.
Yeah.
Meaning, but they use the term Dar al-Harb. It does not entail that Muslims are entering that. So they'll say a musta'min can enter. Musta'min is a non-believer who takes security in Darul Islam. So in today's day and age, that would be taking visas. So if someone enters
seeking asylum,
they will be termed as musta'min. So إذا دخل المستأمن في دار الإسلام, meaning the one who seeks security enters Darul Islam, meaning in modern jargon that would be a non-Muslim who lives in a non-Muslim country enters a Muslim country with a visa. So they mention these type of fiqh rulings, but the term Darul Harb is used, or Harbi, but it doesn't mean that the Harbi is taking up arms against the Muslims. So this is a misreading some people have when they read those fiqh works. So they may use the term Harbi or the term Darul Harb, but what is not entailed is war. Not at all times. Sometimes Al-Imam al-Shaybani rahimahullah in earlier fiqh works will mention a scenario during actual warfare. But generally speaking, it's not in terms of warfare, it's in terms of classifying the world into Darul Harb and Darul Islam. But Darul Harb, again, is a broad term, which some scholars today would use the term Darul Kufr or Darul Amn.
Because I put that piece together on my blog where you have, it's by Muhammad Zuhaili and Imam Muhammad Bulti, and they put it this way, where Darul Kufr is the broader term, and the Darul Harb is that subset within Darul Kufr, where Muslims are being persecuted or there's being...
Some scholars use the term Darul Amn, an abode of security. Some use the term Darul Kufr. But in the Hanafi works, when you find Darul Harb, it's a broad term which all these categories fall into, because there is potential of war.
So basically the European Fatwa Council is not even consulting the Hanafi fiqh books to see what they actually mean by these terms.
I'm not too familiar with the Fatwa Council, but what I do know is that fiqh rulings don't change from one country to another, except with exceptional rulings which are mentioned, for instance, regarding Bughat, rebels, or rulings pertaining to Darul Harb, which are mentioned in the Hanafi works, like inheritance laws. If a person lives in Darul Harb, and if a person lives in Darul Islam, and non-Muslims, certain laws applying to them. But generally speaking, for a Muslim, if he travels from Egypt to France, the rulings are the same. The only rulings that may change is what we would term darurat or hawa'ij. So Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, his work, he has a work on fiqh al-aqliyat. I've got that in the other room, and that work would be really a work of darurat, meaning the qawaid fiqhiyya that he employs, or the usul al-fiqh. And this is also something else regarding calls by some people to rewrite usul al-fiqh. You must have heard about people calling for...
We're writing usul, because Imam Abulti have debates with people about this. Because what he goes into in his statement, his pronouncement against fiqh minorities, he does say that this distinction between... It's one thing to have, say, fatwa for darurat, right? So if someone's in a situation in a country like this where they need to survive for whatever reason it is, something like you said, daruras come up and they seek a fatwa, that's one thing. But then to write a whole new fiqh just because you're living here, that's a whole different ballgame. That's where you're taking things too far.
But these calls for rewriting usul al-fiqh, that's similar to saying the rules of nahw, grammar should be rewritten. Meaning,
you're changing everything.
Istiqra.
Yeah.
How would we translate istiqra?
Like thorough investigation.
Inductive investigation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, istiqra for viewers. Give a simple example of istiqra.
Istiqra. Most common example we have in Shafi fiqh is like where Imam Shafi himself worked out the lengths for menstruation and so forth.
He even knocked doors of.
And talked to and asked women, right? So the Shafi books will say like Imam Ibn al-Qasim al-Ghazi will say in his Sharh on the Matn al-Qadi Abu Shujaa, he'll say that وَدِلِيلُ ذَلِكَ الْإِسْتِقْرَاء, right?
So an example of istiqra would be you go to a place and you go around asking everyone a particular thing, and whatever the overwhelming majority answers with, you would give a judgment. So nahw grammar, the rules of grammar are such that the grammarians, they explored all the different rules of grammar and they picked them up and wrote down the works of nahw until they exhausted the subject. Yes? So once they exhausted the subject, later generations cannot come along and say there are new rules to grammar, or we are going to place a new paradigm to all of grammar and rephrase grammar in new books.
That's impossible.
That would be impossible. So usul al-fiqh, what is usul al-fiqh?
It's the same principles.
Usul al-fiqh is the rules that apply to
how we derive rules from text. It's because another room for usul al-fiqh is ilm tafsir al-nusus, like how do we understand the text, the Quran and the Sunnah, and how do we derive rulings from them?
So someone cannot come along now
and rewrite that
and say we're going to rewrite all of the methods employed by jurists in extracting legal rulings. So these calls now for rewriting usul al-fiqh, or not even calls for rewriting usul al-fiqh, you also have people who give rulings on their own assumptions. You do know this is.
People do things where they'll do ijtihad where there already is a clear text, right? So I've seen people out here in Europe. Someone wrote a book. Some scholar based here. I don't want to mention names, but he wrote a book called Islam Ahda Zawjayn, right? Trying to argue that if let's say if a woman who's not Muslim becomes Muslim and she's still married to a man who's not Muslim, she doesn't have to leave him, because that would be a hardship, that would be a burden on her. But that contravenes a clear text in the Quran, that's from Ayah 10, that a disbelieving man cannot be with a believing woman.
So don't you think this is similar to, or not very similar, there is a distinction between the reformists, Muhammad Abdu and Rashid Rida and all that group of people. The difference between them and the people who are calling for ijtihad now is jahl, meaning those shuyukh of Al-Azhar at that time, irrelevant to our disagreements with them, they were not juhal, they were not ignorant. They went through the traditional classical learning, and then they came out, they were influenced by the British colonialists at that time, and they came out with calls for reform and whatnot, and they were refuted by Imam Yusuf al-Nabahani and others. But now you have the likes of this woman Manji from Canada.
Irshad Manjid,
even she performs ijtihad. So you may this call for ijtihad by the sheikh that you mentioned. I don't know who he is, but he may be learned in a in a certain regard.
He definitely is learning to.
But then they've opened the door up for Irshad Manji. And then you have others as well.
Who don't even know Arabic or anything like that. Because again, the door we're opening, what happens at that point? Once you open that door, you're basically opening the floodgates. That means if everyone can do their own ijtihad.
Amina Wadud.
But if everyone can do their own ijtihad, then everyone's going to have their own religion.
So Amina Wadud, she led men in prayer. And there's certain people who accept that ijtihad. what they call ijtihad, because ijtihad is only done
in the absence of a text.
In the absence of
text,
meaning.
Hadith. Yeah.
So we'll say, if the Quran is explicit, regarding something, or the Hadith is explicit, then we have space for ijtihad.
Yeah.
So these people are performing ijtihad in those things where there's
clear text, and there's ijma as well.
So permitting homosexuality, allowing women to lead prayers. What else do you have? Hijab is not fard.
These kind of things.
And then the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam foretold that toward the end of time women will pray in hayd. People will give that fatwa.
Yeah. Women will pray menstruating.
Yeah, while menstruating they will pray. And there will be groups of people that will say there's only 3 prayers and not 5 prayers.
Okay.
And this is one of the in Mustadrak of Imam al-Hakim. This is one of the Ashratu Sa'a. So Fiqh al-Aqalliyat was one of those things that you tackled in the book.
Yeah.
But with Fiqh al-Aqalliyat, of course, minority fiqh, this would fall into what we would call Fiqh al-Darurat.
Yeah.
But others have relabeled.
Yeah. A fiqh al-Aqalliyat, but it's like you're setting up a separate fiqh, and then that fiqh creates what it leads to eventually is where, you know, Muslims from these countries like America or Canada, they will become unrecognizable. Like they will look so different and appear to be so different from Muslims in the Muslim heartlands. And I used to see that when just living in Morocco. Like living in Morocco, we used to have Americans coming over. Because where I was teaching English and I was studying Arabic as well, you know, university classes from the United States would come over regularly, and then be summer courses or summer groups rather. They would come over, and the Moroccans would just look at them like they're just weird. Just think, like what's with these people? Like we can't tell like who's a Muslim, who's not. When we look at the group.
So you have 2 extremes. You have the pseudo-Salafi movement that calls for people moving away from the 4 schools and going into a directly accessing the Quran, the Sunnah for legal rulings.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the spectrum, you have people calling for ijtihad as well, but they're not from a pseudo-Salafi background. They come from traditional Sunni backgrounds, meaning initially they will adopt either the Maliki school, or they have the Hanafi school, or the Shafi'i school, or the Hanbali school, and then they move on to this reformist mindset. Like in America, you had Yasir Qadhi, who in the early 2000s was following pseudo-Salafism. And then he moved to the reformists, so he'll call Rashid Rida and others now. And then you have people from a traditional Sunni background, and they move to this reformist mindset of ijtihad. And what this leads to is what you're saying is an Islam or a practice of Islam which is unrecognizable.
It's not recognized in the Muslim heartlands. And I think, what I'm saying is fiqh minorities opened the door for that. Fiqh minorities was the start, they started the ball rolling with that. Because then what you got after that was when they had the big unity pact, which I think was in 2007, when the people from those 2 backgrounds, you know, what you said, the pseudo-Salafis and the traditional Muslims, they came together and said, we're all together, we're united. And then they also said in that statement that Muslims shouldn't study theology in depth. They said that you should just stick to the 6 pillars of faith, just stick to you know, Allah, His angels, His books, His messengers, and that's it. Which as I raise in my book, I find that really disturbing, because as a believer and you want to build your relationship with Allah, you need to know who Allah is and what He's promised you. So if you're not going to talk about Allah's promise of salvation based on faith alone, you're not going to talk about seeing Allah in the hereafter, you're not going to talk about having a direct relationship with Allah in this life without the intermediary of a priest or whatever it is, and you put those things aside because you don't want to have controversy, and you make the theology just very stale and just whatever it is, just standardized, and you don't go any deeper, you're cutting people off. And these are major things within Sunni theology.
But if people don't study Sunni theology, they will not be able to counter current trends like militant atheism.
Yeah, there's that aspect of it, and there's also the personal aspect of just developing your relationship with Allah. How are you going to do that?
Spiritual.
Spiritual aspect. How are you going to do that if you don't know what Allah has promised you, how Allah is addressing you in the Quran, the fact that you're supposed to be having a direct relationship with Him?
But here, I want to get on to motives. So, the promotion of fiqh al-aqliyat primarily has two motives I can see. One is political motivation, and secondly, for fiqh al-aqliyat, this is minority fiqh, is considering Islam difficult to follow as it is. This is a common trend now, where people find Islam difficult to follow, meaning because they find it difficult to get up and perform wudu, even though I was just with you now, and we were discussing about praying Asr time, Asr Salah, the late noon prayer, and you said to me, you're a traveller as a Shafi'i, you've combined Zuhr and Asr, so I would see that as ease.
That's easy.
So Al-Imam Jalaluddin As-Suyuti rahimahullah has a book called Jazilul Mawahib fi Ikhtilaf al-Madhahib, where he mentions the four schools as being like the qira'at, even though the qira'at are directly from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He left sallallahu alaihi wasallam a aspect of the religion, which Al-Imam Zahid Al-Kawthari says 20% of the legal rulings open for debate by scholars who are qualified to perform ijtihad. So this was for ease for the nation. So ikhtilafu ummati rahma, even though some people contest the authenticity of the hadith, the statement is true. Ikhtilafu ummati rahma, but ikhtilaf in those furu', the 20%. So you were able to perform your Dhuhr and Asr with ease. So what difficulty are they referring to? Meaning, if you look at the four schools and the ease that is found, for instance, M&Ms, the sweets, they have one of the M&Ms which is red coloured, is made from beetles. Beetle extract. Yes. So in the Hanafi school that would be haram because it's from hasharat, insects. But in the Maliki school, that would be permitted. Yes? So what difficulty are they referring to? Meaning you have the four schools. And by the way, this brings us to another discussion which is not to do with our, meaning regarding taking from the four schools, but that's not our subject. But what difficulty are they referring to? Because when I study the four schools, I read 2 volumes of I'lamul Anam with Sheikh Nuruddin Itr, his own work, I'lamul Anam, 2 volumes of that work.
The Sharh Bulugh al-Maram.
No, Sheikh Nuruddin Itr. His commentary on Bulugh al-Maram.
That's right.
Yes, and that was al-Fiqh al-Muqaran, looking at the four schools and their proofs, and so all we observe is ease in the four schools. So what difficulty are they referring to as minorities? Because both of us are born in the West. Yes, we grew up in the West. Personally, I know that there's difficulties in certain things, but there are many of these things which people bring up have more of a political motivation, and another aspect of an inferiority
complex,
which is another part of your book. So do you see how all these things
they all tie up?
So go into that a bit about this, because you coming from what they call white background, I call it Anglo-Saxon. People call it white background, but I call it Anglo-Saxon background. And me coming from what they term me as a minority background, how would you relate to this inferiority complex some Muslims have?
I think, because my ancestors were part of the colonization of India. I do have an ancestor called John Bascom Locke, who was beheaded by the Faradi movement in the Punjab. 150 years ago. So I do think, the English, and Imam al-Bulti talks about this at length in Qubla al-Kawniya. The English didn't just come in there and take the riches and go. They did think long term, and they did want to how can I best put it? They really wanted to break the people and
colonize the minds.
Yeah, colonize their minds. Malcolm X said that. He said what's in a colonized land is a colonized mind. If your mind is colonized, then nothing else matters.
So there was an iftar in the masjid, one of the masajid, and they invited me, and they called the Lord Mayor, and the Lord Mayor was an African woman of African descent, West Indian African descent, and a woman.
Yeah.
So I went, and when they told me to give the lecture, so majority of the people there are Muslims. They had some non-Muslims, some Anglo-Saxon English non-Muslims, and some other non-Muslims, and I invited them all to Islam.
Okay.
And told them that giving charity, we do not give charity in this country in order to impress you. We give it for the sake of God.
Okay.
So they were upset at that speech, not the non-Muslims. The Muslims were upset. The non-Muslims were happy.
Yeah.
The Muslims were upset at that speech.
It's like it's a shame thing. I mean, I see a lot of these people. It's not just Asians. I think even some Anglo-Saxon converts. I think one term I coined to myself, I said it's like they're the bad smell brigade. And what I mean by that, I'm not saying they smell bad. What I'm saying is they treat Islam like a bad smell. It's like they're always apologizing for it. Like, excuse me, I've just come from the gym. Please, excuse me, pardon me. I need to go home and have a shower. I forgot my itter at home or something like this. That's what they tend to talk about Islam. They're always apologizing for it. They're always making excuses for it and saying, no, it doesn't really mean that. We don't really say that. And they take it too far, where it gets to the point where people who aren't Muslims see it as ridiculous. Like, there are so many times, I've lost count of how many times I've been in a situation where I'm sat with someone who's not a Muslim. It could be at work, it could be in a cafe, it could be on a train, we're just talking or something, and a Muslim will just interrupt and be like, and say to me like, oh, because I'm dressed like this, oh, you don't have to dress like that, all nervously. Like, first, A, where did you come from? B, why are you assuming that it's a problem? Why are you assuming that?
That's actually happened where you've had a Muslim.
Yeah, a Muslim has said something, and it's assumed that the way I'm dressed is giving him panic attacks or something, right? And then this guy who's not Muslim comes to my defense and says, "No, what? I like what he's wearing."
But here, with this dress code, relating that to minority fiqh, some people have made an issue of both of us are wearing thobe.
Yeah.
So we're wearing a thobe now. I wear a thobe because I'm comfortable in a thobe.
Yeah.
I've been wearing thobes from the age of 13.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable in a thobe.
Yeah.
But some people, they don't feel comfortable me wearing a thobe. Meaning Muslims who are not comfortable with me or you wearing a thobe.
Yeah.
So there are some people attempting to appease that crowd by saying the garment is not as important, but there is something known as Sha'airul Islam.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is hallmarks of a Muslim and Islam. That mindset, does it relate to what we term as minority fiqh, or people who are adopting minority fiqh, meaning in order to feel comfortable amongst non-Muslims? Because what happened when I was returning back from the West Indies, I met a person who was from a pseudo-Salafi background, who said to me, how do you travel? Do you not get into trouble wearing these kind of clothes while doing international flights? And I said, no, why should garments cause a problem for me?
Yeah, I had the same issue, because I always fly like this. I've been to the US like this, I've been here like this. I've never had an issue. Again, but it has to do with mindset. It has to do with mindset, because you're bringing this point about inferiority complex. It has to do with mindset. Like, if you go around like in an airport in a thobe, and you have that look on your face where you're like, right, and you automatically draw suspicion to yourself. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, you go into an airport and you're standing in line and people are looking at me, right? The police will come up to you, or security will come up to you and question you, and then you can scream Islamophobia and all that stuff. But no, you brought that on yourself. If you act totally normally, and you act like the way I'm dressed is totally normal, there's nothing weird about it, people will not say anything. But if you treat it as if it is something weird.
But in a Western culture, where you have people dressing
all kinds of ways,
Yeah, you have people dressing in so many different ways. Why
or barely dressed at all.
Yeah, so some of them look like they're ready to go into the shower.
Yeah.
Meaning on the road.
Yeah.
So why would our what people term as Islamic garb or Eastern or exotic clothing, why would our clothing be a problem for people? Why is it a problem for Muslims?
It's an inferiority complex. Because again, the whole time that I wear a thobe, the only issue I get is from Muslims. I've never ever had a problem with a disbeliever. Never.
But do you think that's because you're white?
No, because I get backed up from stories, people like you, people like other teachers I know, they say the same thing. They've never had a problem from someone who's like not a Muslim.
I've never had a problem with the...
It's always been Muslims.
Non-Muslim.
It's always, the grief has always come from Muslims.
So does that fall into also political political Muslims, not political Islam, in the West, who may adopt minority fiqh because it suits their political agenda? Because I've had or heard of people listening to our televangelist muftis or people giving these minority fiqh type of rulings and relating to those people because it suits what they want to promote in their political agenda. So you have people in the Labour Party, Liberal Democrats, and even the Conservatives, because the Conservatives in this country are no longer conservative.
Yeah, they're very leftist now.
Meaning they were the ones who introduced homosexual marriages into legislation.
Yeah.
So you have Muslims in these political parties that will further LGBT activism in those political parties or elsewhere, but they will claim to be Muslim.
Yeah.
And they will adopt minority fiqh. And so those scholars who are promoting minority fiqh are kind of appealing to that type of crowd. So there's political motives, but also an inferiority complex, which is
it's a mindset. Because again, if people are coming here, if people are coming to these countries, not thinking about how can I establish myself here as a Muslim, how can I preach Islam here, right? Which is one of the things that Imam Ahmad Zuhaili mentioned in his fatwa about. Someone asked him a question about migrating to the West and taking up citizenship, and he said, if you're going to go out there, it should be short term. If you're just going out there to study or to seek medical treatment or whatever it is, that's fine. Or you have some sort of some trade to do, that's fine. But if you're going to stay there long term, your mission is Dawah. You have to be, because what we want to see is we want to see Darul Kufr become Darul Islam. Now, before people get scared and alarmed by that, what he means is by persuasion and conviction, right? We have to preach the faith and bring people that way. But if you're going to be out there and your faith is going to be watered down and eroded over time, then you get out. You shouldn't be there. So if people are here with another intention, they've come out here to get a better standard of living, to make some money, they just want to fit in. That's what it looks like. They just want to fit in. They don't want to cause any sort of controversy.
What I've always thought is a lack of confidence in Islam is due to a weakness of Iman, a weakness of faith.
Yeah.
So, and a weakness of faith is due to what?
Weakness of faith, a lack of knowledge.
But someone would say some of these du'at, callers to Islam, have immense knowledge regarding Islam.
It's a lack of knowledge, but I think one of the things I got in the book, there's knowledge, but there's also you have to go back to, we had a discussion with that brother in the masjid, subhanAllah, about like why people become Muslim in the first place, right? So one of the things I got to, because I'm in my book I am talking more, I think, to new Muslims as opposed to newly committed Muslims. But you look at some of these prominent, what I call spokesmen for Islam in the West, or hippie converts as they call them. A lot of these people, they became Muslim in the 1970s at a time when Islam was hip and cool, right? It was the trendy thing to do. It was radical. It was counterculture. It was anti-establishment. And it's actually something that myself and another brother, Abu Nur al-Mizi, you know who that is, we worked this out. So at that time, it was very cool to be Muslim. So they got on that bandwagon. And they found it exotic. They found it exciting. So conviction was a secondary thing. Conviction was not the main thing of why they became Muslim. So as long as Islam was cool and funky, they were with it. They were on the train. And this carried through from the 70s through to the 80s, through the 90s. You remember the 90s, the Malcolm X movie came out in 92 and so forth. But then 9/11 events, right? September 11, 2001, which I mentioned right at the beginning of my book. I say that's a major event. That's a seminal event, because after that, like very, very quickly, it became very, very uncool.
A lot of our listeners, a lot of our listeners, younger people, were not even born when 9/11 happened, and a lot of them were young children. So now they may be in their early 20s or in their teens. So they don't relate to what we talk about regarding pre 9/11 and post 9/11.
Yeah,
they've not seen that shift. So many of them, the first type of thinking they've been introduced to is post 9/11.
Yeah.
But they won't see that radical shift regarding some of the what you term as hippie Muslim converts, how they shifted.
Yeah.
Meaning the radical type of preaching that they did
in the 90s,
in the 90s, and then post 9/11, they went to the other extreme of being pro-governments and pro-foreign policy, and meaning shifting a lot of the blame on Muslims.
Yeah.
Because that's what occurred after 9/11.
Yeah, it was a complete shit. But what I was getting at with the theory was that because Islam became uncool, they sort of lost their sort of enthusiasm for it, because Islam was no longer giving them what they wanted from Islam. Because one of the major things I point in that book is that when you become a Muslim, it's not about you, right? You're serving Allah and you're serving His religion. That's what you're doing now that you're a Muslim. You're not becoming a Muslim because of what Islam can do for you, because Islam can give you a warm and fuzzy feeling inside, or Islam can give you some money, or Islam can give you a social life. That's not why you're becoming a Muslim. You're becoming a Muslim to serve Allah. So like one of the lines...
Ubudiyya, servitude.
Yeah, it's Ubudiyya. One of the things I said in the book was I said that the ship of salvation, which is what Islam is, the ship of salvation is open. It's there. Anyone can get on board. But once you're on board, it's all hands on deck. Right? You have to get down to work. You can't be like waiting around for other people to serve you and take care of you. You have to put the effort in. And that's why I take it further before that. And I quote Imam Muhammad al-Ash'ari, the great Egyptian scholar, because I translated a huge chunk of his tafsir when I was living in Morocco. And he mentioned one time where he was in America, and someone asked him about the apostasy ruling. They said, why is it that an apostate is executed? What's the reason for this? And he switched it around. He said that ruling is less to do with someone leaving the faith and more to do with someone entering the faith. It's quality control.
You mentioned that in the book.
Yeah, I mentioned in the book. It's quality control.
Yeah.
It's quality control. We don't want, if you're not going to be serious about this, we don't want you. This isn't a bingo club. This isn't a Sunday afternoon tennis club. If you're not serious, don't join. So, and I always put that at the forefront of my mind. So, you know, if we go back to the clothing issue, if my clothing, something as simple as my clothing, makes someone feel uneasy and they get put off, fine. I don't want to attract every single person to Islam, because I know that the majority of humanity will reject it. I don't want to attract everyone. I want the high quality people, the low maintenance people. Because again, in the book I take it back further, because there's the verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Araf, I 172, where Allah gathers all the souls of humanity, and this is before they come into the world, and says, Alastu bi Rabbikum, and they call Bala Shahidna, am I not your Lord? And they all testify. Imam Abdul Rahman al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, in his tafsir, Zad al-Masir, he points it out, he says that when this statement was made, some people meant it, and some people didn't mean it. Everyone said Bala, but not everyone was saying the truth. And whatever you said on that day, that's your fate. That's what's going to happen.
Some of them were delayed as well in saying Bala.
Yes.
Here, my theological warring with some of these people of the past few years, what I observed is that they don't have a depth when it comes to kalam. So you may have a theological dispute. So I will say to an individual that to state that the Lahori Qadianis are believers, and because they believe Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani was the Mahdi and not a prophet. Meaning one of these guys, while teaching Aqidah to Ahli Sunnah wal Jama'ah, so he's teaching Al-Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi's text. And when it comes to the point of Khatamun Nabiyyin, he points out things like saying the qira'ah of the verse ما كان محمد أبا أحد من رجالكم ولكن رسول الله
وخاتم النبيين.
Yeah, he states that there's two qira'ahs.
Okay.
Which there are two qira'ahs. One is khatam and one is khatim.
Yeah.
But he mentions that after saying that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani, his group is two groups. One is the mainstream and one is the Lahori Qadianis that believe Mirza Ghulam was the Mahdi. So we don't consider them as disbelievers.
Okay.
So after mentioning that, he says, look, the verse has two recitations, Khatim and Khatam. It's interesting, and he moves on. Meaning, I refuted him on that after, and he did retract because of Al-Azhar fatwa, not because of me, because of Al-Azhar. As if we have blind faith in Al-Azhar, because in aqaid, but in beliefs, there is no blind faith to an institution. So what I found, two things I observed from that, and not only that dispute, other disputes as well, was number one was the lack of depth in kalam. So they have a very surface-based, superficial approach to kalam, a translation of a text, but there's no intellectual, rational and spiritual depth to understanding kalam, because some people disassociate kalam from spirituality. But if you read the works like Hashiyatul Dasuqi, and you read even Al-Bajuri, these are latecomers, but more importantly Al-Imam al-Sunusi, you will realize all of these major mutakallimin, or majority of them, Sunni mutakallimin, were Sufis. Al-Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali being one of the major, at the forefront of that. So the first thing I noticed was their lack of depth, which I believe is the reason for their weakness of Iman when it comes to, when a fitna, a tribulation comes their way,
they don't know how to handle it.
Their Iman undergoes a test. And the second thing is how they will leave subtle hints and not say something explicitly until the zeitgeist
passes,
is the right time.
Because they tend to do that. I notice that they tend to do that a lot. They tend to sort of say everything's a difference of opinion.
So why mention the qira'ah of Khatam and Khatim, and then later on hold conferences and you invite a representative of the Qadiani community? And then a third thing is associating theological disputes with violence. So if we were to refute the Qadiani, or what people term as the Ahmadiyya, we refute them. This does not entail that we call for violence against a group, or persecution of a group, or murdering of a group. But they've associated theological disputes with violence and politics. So if I refute the Shia on Bahthul Imama, leadership, I'm not calling for killing of Shia in Iraq and Lebanon and other places, or for the Shia to be persecuted in as a minority. No, meaning our dispute is theological, but it doesn't mean that there is no ta'ayush, living as a community as the way we live with other communities. But what they've gone and done is associated theological disputes with violence. Or if you're embroiled in theological disputes, you're a repugnant individual who has no basic manners, you cannot sit and dialogue. But they won't tell the audience that Al-Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah spent majority of his life refuting deviants.
As did Imam Muhammad Ghazali, refuting the Batiniyin.
Likewise. But with Al-Imam Abu Hamid, they attempt to say regarding him that toward the end of his life, because he moved into tasawwuf, he moved away from refuting, which is incorrect. he still refuted deviancy, because with the incorrect belief, you can have no spirituality.
Yeah, exactly.
Meaning a Buddhist monk can sit for days and months without food and perform acts of worship, but why does he not attain maqam al-ihsan?
Yeah.
Because the belief is incorrect.
Yeah, there's actually, there's a story, I think it's Imam Hassan al-Basri had a story like that where he said, I believe it was him, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was him, where he said that he reached a station with Allah, a maqam with Allah, where every prayer was like a nafil. That's how it felt. Every prayer was a nafil. Like, that's how he was praying, with so much joy and peace. And then he lost that maqam. He said he lost that maqam once because an innovator said something in his presence and he didn't refute him. You see, there's a clear connection there between having sound theology and refuting.
But the same people would also make the audience think that certain sins are greater than innovation. Meaning downplaying bid'ah.
Yeah.
Bid'ah in belief.
Yeah.
Not bid'ah in practice, bid'ah in belief. So a person can have a bid'ah in belief and there's a tolerance for that.
Yeah.
But there's a lack of tolerance for other things, which we would term as being furu'.
Yeah.
I remember they made a documentary regarding Al-Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali.
Yeah.
And in that documentary, an actor plays Al-Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahimahullah, and in that documentary they portray Al-Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali as being someone as tolerant towards innovators and heresy. But being intolerant towards heresy or innovators doesn't mean we're intolerant towards them in terms of living.
Exactly. No,
it just means the belief is refuted logically.
You have to distinguish between the belief and the person. That's the thing they don't understand, because I've seen this as well, especially on like the leftist side of in the American media. They do this a lot. They'll say that, you know, if you believe, they'll go after like Christians, for example. They say, like, if you belong to a Christian sect and you believe that other people are damned and they're not going to be saved, you're just a terrible person. That means you want them to die. That means you want them to have their limbs chopped off or something like that. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that they're not saved. It's theological. It's theological.
You mentioned the four things. That minority fiqh was one. What were the others?
The second one was the unity pact that they did. The so-called Salafi Sufi unity pact of I think it was 2007.
What problems did you have with this unity pact? Because this unity issue, I have a lot of discussions with different segments of our Sunni community on these unity issues. So in the subcontinent, people call for unity with everyone and anyone. They call them sulh kulli.
Yeah.
This is what they term them as, being someone who makes sulh. Kulli meaning a universal sulh.
Yeah.
But this has a very exact meaning. I mean, there's a fiqh to this also.
Yeah.
But what did this unity pact entail? This particular one?
Well, I thought it was number one, it was utterly useless, because first of all, no one who's signing that thing is any sort of form of authority, right? These people are not authorities in standing in terms of the Muslim world. They're not. Number one. Number two, it doesn't mean anything on paper, because what are you actually uniting upon? If we are going to unite on something, we have to unite on certain principles or beliefs, whatever it is. The differences between the two sides are so great. There is no unity. There is no common ground. Their understanding of Tawheed is different. Their understanding of fiqh is totally different. We don't agree on anything.
This is between Sunni Muslims.
Yeah.
And who we define as Sunni, Ashari, Maturidi, and the real Athari, non-Taymiyan Atharis, and the followers of the four schools. So the pseudo-Salafi, this is just for our audience, the pseudo-Salafi movement would say Ibn Taymiyyah and the Hanbalis who follow Ibn Taymiyyah are Sunni, but we would say the Hanbalis who are Athari, they are Sunni. So that's one distinction. The pseudo-Salafi movement would say the Asharis and the Maturidis are not Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and we would say they are Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But going back to the unity pact, so me and you, I think we would agree that when it comes to theological disputes, Sunni Muslims should rationally logically, intellectually, refute any heresy that raises its head amongst Sunni Muslims, whether irrelevant to what sect that person may belong to. Even amongst our own, meaning people who are nominally described as being Sunni Muslims, if they come up with something which is a heresy, scholars should take them up on that issue. But the problem is that becomes politicized after.
Yeah. Because
it does cause.
Well, yeah, because it's like the greatest crime out here is like disunity. Don't call for disunity. Don't cause disunity. That seems to be the biggest crime out here. I mean, if you refute anyone, if you criticize anyone, now you're guilty of spreading fitna.
You're divisive.
You're divisive. And
but how would you say? See, we have, like I said, there's a fiqh to association with Ahlul Bidah.
Yeah.
And in my phone conversations with one of the prominent du'at from the US, he actually said that to me, which he is correct. Meaning, in my phone conversation, he said to me, there is a fiqh to those ahadith narrations or the also the statements of as-Salaf as-Salihun regarding association with Ahlul Bidah. So the hadith states, "Man waqara sahiba bid'atin faqad a'ana ala hadm al-Islam." Whoever venerates a person of bid'ah innovation, he has a'ana, helped in the destruction of Islam.
Yeah.
But there is a fiqh to association. So how do we make a distinction between associating with Ahlul Bidah where there's a common objective, like RSE now, relationships and sexual education, you have Sunni ulama working alongside with Christians, Jews, within Muslims, different sects within Muslims, which is fine, meaning I don't think you would have a problem with that, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But some people cannot see the distinction between these two.
Yeah, because that's a common cause. That's where you have a common problem that you need to address. It's the same as, if you were to work with Christian or Jewish neighbors to clean up the litter on your street, or to clean up your park, or to.
So, like, if I call for a debate with a local vicar and we meet up, which does happen, by the way, and we discuss theological disputes. So my local vicar, he comes to my house, or we go out together and have a coffee, but we actually debate. We will debate regarding the divinity of Christ. We'll debate regarding the prophethood of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, regarding the Bible, regarding the Quran. But we're still friends. People would term us as being friends. And if there's a common cause like litter picking, or we need to do something, if I can do that with a local vicar, why can't I debate a Muslim on our theological disputes and make it very clear we dispute these things, but when there's a common cause, we can work in that common cause.
You mean with like Christians and Jews, you mean?
The way we can with Christians and Jews, why can't Muslims amongst themselves? Because what I'm seeing is that there's two extremes here. There's an extreme of where people will not refute, even though that the person is theologically deviant. They will stay totally silent. Those people would be sinful, because the hadith says فَلْيُظْهِرِ الْعَالِمُ عِلْمَهُ. That in the end times, when the Sahaba being cursed, and the alim, the learned man, must make his knowledge apparent, meaning in refuting them. But then there's the other side where they will work with them in every other thing, but they won't refute them. What I'm saying is, can there be scholarship where, or scholars amongst themselves, where ulama who refute the deviants, but when there's a need to work on common goals, certain ulama, they can work on those common goals? I mean, is that achievable amongst Muslims?
That's a tricky one, because it would have to be done in a way that's not public, if you know what I mean. It's because the point is that Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is not meant to be seen as or presented as equal to any cult, whether it's the Shia or the Khawarij, whatever. It's not meant to be presented as equal in any way, shape, or form. like a Sunni Muslim scholar is not the equal of
a deviant.
Yeah, one of their leaders, or whatever it is. It's not the same thing. Now, if it's to work on some sort of common issue, like you're mentioning these schools thing, I would see that merely as an act of convenience, that you get it done, but it should never be presented as, or allowed to think that they're sort of your equal, or that they are on the same par as you. That's what I would
be aware of.
Yeah.
So, in that regard, if certain Sunni ulama had refuted some of these deviant groups, as they should, meaning it's a farida and an obligation on groups of Sunni ulama to refute deviants, how would they strike a balance with working with them when they see a pressing need? Personally, I don't see a pressing need, even though different groups of people do call me. But the way I see things is, if you unite our Sunni Muslims in this day and age, it's a great achievement.
Yeah.
Never mind uniting with other groups. But I'm not quick to condemn a scholar unless I've looked at all the different angles as to why he's associating with certain groups. So how do we make a fine balance of having that husnul dhan?
Yeah.
How would you translate husnul dhan?
Having good opinion or benefit of the doubt.
Having benefit of the doubt for such scholars.
Yeah.
Because I'm not seeing a balance of giving benefit of the doubt from one side, and from the other side, there's not ample refutation of deviant beliefs, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Because so what you're saying is that there tends to be more of this dependence on unity, and where you're working side by side with these people, but you're not actually warning them or preaching against them. Or,
at one point you'll have a call for unity, but there's no delineation of the parameters of orthodoxy, Sunni Islam. Yes?
Yeah. Okay.
And then you'll have from people from another side who won't work with deviants, but they won't give good opinion of those scholars who work with deviants. In some cases, those scholars may be very innocent of what they are accused of. Meaning, I'm not seeing a balance of these two things. But what were the main problems you had with the Unity Pact? So going back to that,
so the Unity Pact is not is the fact that it's stated on paper, but it has no effect. This is my second point. It has no effect on the ground, because some of the major signatories to it, they were asked online right away, like, especially from what you were saying, the Sunni Salafi side. They were saying, like, what are you doing? Are you saying that the Ash'aris are Sunnis? Are you saying that they're this or that? Like, no, they're still deviants, they're still wrong. It was just to come together to calm things down in the situation, to calm things down, and we're in this current situation. So it had no real effect. It was just a piece of paper, right? Those arguments and disputes stayed as they were. But the third thing, which I don't know, I find this, I'm not saying it's the worst thing, but I find that really disturbing, and I mentioned this before, is the fact that you telling common believers, just study your 6 pillars of faith and that's it. Like don't go any further in your theological studies. Just read the Jibril hadith and that's it, you're done. And how is that going to help you build your own relationship with Allah? How is that going to help you? Like if you're not going to talk about seeing Allah in the hereafter, you're not going to talk about salvation by faith alone, and not deeds, which again is another issue that some of these other people hold to, right? That salvation is by
deeds.
Exactly, right? Which means that you're in some sort of transaction with Allah, which is a big problem. So if you don't talk about these things, and you're a Sunni Muslim and you're trying to grow in your faith, and you don't talk about these things, how are you going to grow? If you don't fully understand who Allah is, what He's promised you.
So if they had a unity pact with, let's say, the Shia, the Shia cursed the companions.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have a unity pact that we won't refute you. That would entail we don't refute you on when you curse the companions.
Yeah.
Or, for instance, if they had a unity pact with groups that say Allah can potentially lie, meaning that would mean we stay silent on those theological issues when they are brought up.
Yeah.
These things become very problematic.
There's no benefit in it. There's no benefit in. I don't see what the point of these unity pacts are, because it's just a piece of paper. It's just a piece of paper that says we met and we think that's what people should do, and they're not authority figures. They don't hold authority over anyone. They're basically self-appointed people. They put themselves in these positions. And
again, going back to what I mentioned in minority fiqh, don't you see there's a intertwining of politics, violence, regarding violence in the Middle East, which, by the way, is mainly due to Western destabilizing of the Middle East.
Yeah.
Meaning prior to Saddam, Iraq
was stable.
Prior to Saddam being removed, Iraq was more stable than it is now. Even though Saddam himself, he led Iraq into the war with Iran.
In the 80s,
But even that was from behind the doors. There was behind closed doors. There were deals made with the West and whatnot. Or prior to destabilizing Syria, Syria was more stable. So violence that occurs in the Middle East, people call for certain conferences. You must have heard of these conferences in Jordan, where they not only call for unification of the four madhabs, which are already unified as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They add the Zaydis, the 12 Shia, they add the Ibadis, Ibadiyya.
It becomes like 7 madhabs or something.
And they made 7 madhahib, which was something new, meaning we know that the ijma' of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is on 4 madhahib, but then additional to that, interlinking the madhahib to violence. As if to say, your ijma' that you claim Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is 4 madhabs would entail that you are violent extremists against other groups. The 8th one was the Salafis. But by saying that Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is the 4 madhabs, Asharis and Maturidis and the Atharis, this is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is what the orthodoxy has been formed around.
That's the Sawad al-A'zam.
Does not entail that we call for violence against Zaydis in Yemen, or the 12 Shia in Iraq. Meaning, psychologically, this is what people are being brainwashed into by doing takfir of the Qadianis, or the what they call the Ahmadiyya, because I don't want to ascribe them to the name Ahmad. So the Qadianiyya, in fact, some of our scholars would call them Ghulamiyya because the founder's name was Ghulam Ahmad. So does not mean that we call for violence against those groups. But these conferences, also the names of the people who signed the Unity Pact, and the people who call for minority fiqh, and the people who are influenced by Rashid Rida and Muhammad Abdul, do you not see a
it's the same
pattern?
names. It's the same names. That's one of those 4 things I mentioned in my book. There's 4.
So the third abomination.
So the third abomination was the Mardin Declaration,
which is explained that because
because that was the third thing. And this was, I think, it was an outgrowth of minority fiqh, because that happened in 2010, and this was led by a prominent Mauritanian scholar and certain others. And they were.
You mean Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't mention any names of the book, but
no. In the book you didn't. But again, just for the viewers, mentioning the Sheikh's name doesn't mean Mahdi Lak is disrespecting the Sheikh. It's intellectual difference. And likewise, meaning whenever I mention names, people, again, psychologically they associate that with being disparaging a Sheikh or. When that's not the case. We are from traditional Sunni backgrounds. We don't disrespect other shuyukh.
So it's that conference, and that conference was all centered on one hadith that Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah wrote about the people of Mardin, or that place. Was he was asked, is it Dar al-Kufr or Dar al-Islam? And he couldn't give a straight answer because he said it was ruled by the Tatars, who he doubted.
And Mardin is in modern day Turkey. Because Mardini, the famous author of the commentary on Rahabiyya.
Mardini.
So I'm sure it's the same area.
So Imam Taqi ibn Taymiyyah, he couldn't give a clear ruling because he said on the one hand it's ruled by the Tatars, right? Who he doubted their Islam. He didn't think they were sincere in their Islam. They were still applying and implementing parts of their older law. I forget the name now, but it's all written down. I have links on my blog for this. So he didn't. So he said, I don't want to call it Dar al-Kufr. or he said, I don't want to call it Darul Islam on those grounds because because he was wary of the nature of the rulers.
And this is Ibn Taymiyyah.
Yeah, Imam Taqi Ibn Taymiyyah. Because there's another famous one, there's Majduddin Ibn Taymiyyah, which is the grandfather.
The grandfather.
Yeah, who's the Mu'tamin source of the madhab. And then he didn't want to call it Darul Kufr because the majority were Muslims, right? And he felt that wouldn't be right because the majority of people living there are Muslims, or all of them are Muslims. So they extrapolated from this ruling, which again, Imam Shamsuddin al-Mufli al-Hanbali, who's one of his students, he comes later with his own book,
the author of Al-Adab al-Shari'iyya.
Adab al-Shari'iyya, right? And he points out that he quotes this fatwa from Imam Taqi Ibn Taymiyyah and says, yes, but the Mu'tasim position of our school is if Muslims rule, it's Darul Islam. If unbelievers rule, it's Darul Kufr. End of. There's no.
While in the Hanafi school, by the way,
yeah.
In fact, in the other three schools as well, in the other three schools, if the disbelievers take over a Muslim country, it still remains Darul Islam.
Yeah, that's what we're
yes, the three madhabs.
Yeah.
In the Hanafi school, there's three conditions for that, but overall, they believe that even if non-believers rule an area, it still remains Darul Islam.
Yeah.
So Spain would be Darul Islam technically.
Yeah.
But in the Hanafi school it wouldn't, because the Sha'airul Islam have been done away with.
Yeah, okay.
But India would remain as Darul Islam because the Sha'airul Islam are still there.
Okay.
But this doesn't mean those scholars are calling for absence of jihad. So occupied Palestine is Darul Islam.
Yeah.
Technically. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that the occupation should not be fought against.
Yeah, yeah. So now what they did from this Mardin Declaration, this fatwa of Imam Taqi Ibn Taymiyyah. Now again, Imam Shamsuddin al-Mufli, commenting on that fatwa afterwards, tells you that it's not canon.
It's not the mu'tamad.
It's not a position for the madhab. It's just a rare ruling. But they take that and then branch out from it and say that Darul Islam and Darul Kufr don't exist anymore.
Oh, okay. So, isn't Sheikh bin Baya also responsible for saying that the Khilafah is no longer applicable because the secular state fulfills the role of the Khilafah? This is what was told.
I don't know if he said that.
But there are some people who've said that the modern secular state preserves religion. Looks after the affairs of religion.
Yeah, well, one of the things. Okay, what they get to in that fatwa, this declaration they made is that first, so they do away with Darul Kufr, Darul Islam. They say it doesn't exist anymore. The whole world is one abode. Then they take it further, and they say that because of international treaties and international organizations, international charters and so forth, the world has achieved, human beings on earth have achieved peace and security, and therefore this is the most that the Sharia can hope for. The way the world is now is what the Sharia has.
So the new world order, Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new secular.
They don't say that explicitly.
But what we have is with the UN Charter. I mean, for him to claim that there's peace in the world is absurd because
it's not him. Just all the signatories. Now,
so how many signatories were there?
I think it was something like 15 to 20 people were involved in this. Now, there's
which prominent Muslims? Were there any prominent?
Yeah, there was a.
They were all Muslims.
Yeah, they're all Muslim. Yeah, they're all Muslims.
There's prominent scholars also.
Yeah. No, the point here is the point. There's two interesting points here to make. Okay, number one, out of these 15-20 people, not a single person was from the Hanbali madhab.
Yeah.
Right? Which that is quite dubious, right? Like
because the fatwa was based on the
Hanbali madhab, right? That would be really weird. Like if you got together and had a major conference to discuss some rare fatwa of Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali, and there's not a single Shafi scholar present. It's just it's Hanafis and Malikis discussing or something like that. That would just look dubious. And this is 2010. This is before the crisis broke out in Syria. There are loads of Hanbali scholars just across the border in Damascus and Douma,
Yeah, Duma's filled with the Hanbalis.
Exactly. That's a Hanbali stronghold. You couldn't speak to one of them, invite them up, or consult them first. So none of them are invited. That's, I find, really, really, interesting, to say the least. The second thing that's really interesting is the fact that, or I find more than interesting and quite amazing, is that Imam Muhammad al-Balti, in his book Fiqh Sirah, which first came out in the 1960s, he quotes Imam Muhammad Zuhaili, who wrote his PhD thesis, I think it was called, something called Fiqh al-Harb, I think it was, I forget the exact name now, but it was like the Ahkam of Harb. And what they both say, is Imam al-Balti is quoting him, but what they both say is, they give a prediction. Okay, this is in the 1960s. I've dated this back maybe as definitely earlier than 1968. Is they say that what we're going to see in the future in the West is you're going to have people in the West who will try to completely distort what jihad is. So they're going to say, people on the one side of the spectrum, they're going to say it's all terrorism. It's all just murder, raping and pillaging, blowing up buildings, killing people. That's what it is. Okay? And then while Muslims are trying to formulate a response to this, there will be other non-believers on the other side of the spectrum, and they'll say, no. Islam means peace. Islam is a religion of love.
Pacifist religion.
Exactly. Right? And then Muslims will get sucked into that and think, oh yeah, that's right, that sounds nice. And then they'll fall into that line. And they even say, Imam Ahmad Zuhaili, Imam Muhammad al-Balti, this is in Fiqh Sirah, they say that Muslims will get sucked into this and they'll be told, you don't need to fight, you don't need to resist, because we have international treaties, we have international organizations in place, and everyone's rights are now secured, and blah, 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 blah. And
that's happened now in 2010.
Yeah, so they were saying the 1960s, and it actually happened in 2010. It was the same wording, pretty much.
Wasn't this also similar to what he said in the 90s, that there will be groups created that will tarnish the name of jihad, tarnish jihad in the name of jihad, in order to undermine the Palestinian resistance? Meaning, now you have groups that tarnish the name of jihad by performing acts which are a violation of human rights, a violation of Islam. But yet they term that as being jihad. So when they do that in the name of jihad, this distorts the valid jihad or the valid resistance of the people of Palestine or other people, because Palestine, the issue of Palestine is an Islamic issue for its national issue. So you're saying the Mardin Declaration was a fulfillment of what they stated in the
1960s, and it's a complete nullification, because if we're going to say that the way the world is now is what the Sharia commands, then why is Imam Mahdi going to come? Why is Isa saying?
You mentioning Al-Imam Al-Mahdi radiyallahu anh, that's going on to another issue, which is what people will say, that people who hold the belief in Al-Imam Al-Mahdi are believing in an apocalyptic Islam. I'll go into that shortly, but before going into that, by saying that the world is fine the way it is and the treaties that we have, do they overlook world debt? The IMF, just the poverty that the IMF brings about, the murder involved in countries which are under debt, meaning murdering of people, meaning 24,000 people die every day of hunger alone. 24,000, that's minimum. And then additional to that, the militarizing of many parts of the world, and breaking of borders and displacing of people that occurs due to the Anglosphere. So how are these national treaties and the New World Order that we have, how is this a fulfillment of what Islam wants to achieve? Meaning it's the exact opposite of what Islam wants to achieve, because Islam came to abolish riba, interest-based loans and usury, and Islam came to bring peace, meaning the legislation of jihad was to because the Quran states cut off their tips.
Yeah.
Banan.
Yeah.
It doesn't say, meaning the metaphor used is the tips. Why? Because the tips are what is by what the disbeliever carries the sword with.
Yeah.
If you cut off his tips, he's unable to show you aggression.
Yeah.
So the legislation of jihad, if you could picture the disbeliever as a man, meaning the whole disbelieving world, the legislation of jihad was only to cut off the tips, meaning the aggressive part is only the tips of the fingers.
Yeah.
So they can't continuously attack other nations as they have been doing from the opium wars in China until the modern age. So how is this because these same people, what they stated recently was that the secular world order that we have is in fact a replacement of Khilafah.
Yeah, that's basically what they're saying. And like you're pointing out, I mean, I don't know why they're saying this. There's no proof for it, but that was in that order. You see, I think, like again, it was the fiqh minorities that led to that Mardin Declaration, and then after that, you got the study Quran.
This is number 4 now.
Yeah.
Of your 4, what did you term that?
Abominations.
The 4 abominations.
Yeah.
With the study Quran, give us a bit of background from your perspective, because I did do an entire lecture on the study Quran.
Yeah, but I found out about it because Abu Nur al-Mizzi, he got in touch with me. He was with you in Sham, and he broke it down for me, explained what was going on. He said that they're bringing this new translation out of the Quran, and it's basically a perennialist translation. While they're mentioning other sources, but it's largely perennialist. A lot of these ayat about what they call salvific exclusivity, those ayats are watered down, right? They're misinterpreted, whether it's Surah Al-Imran, ayah 19, or ayah 85, and so on and so forth. Adin Allah al-Islam, these kind of ayat, the origin of the law is Islam. They're changing these ayat, and it's being promoted heavily by people who are supposed to be Sunni Muslims, right? And you know, he sent me clips, and I listened to them. You know, people going on podcasts, people going to events, hosting events for the book in their own institutes, and saying, you have to buy this book. This is the translation we've been waiting for. This is the translation that you can.
It's the King James. Of for them.
Yeah. You can buy this and give it to your non-Muslim neighbor. Say, this is our book. This is what we believe. And so, what the brother did, Abu Nur al-Mizzi, what he did is he wrote out a long refutation of it, and I hosted it on my blog. I put it on my blog, and it's, I think till this day, it's still the highest viewed post. It's like 10,000 and something. And everyone read it. Everyone got around to everyone, especially the people involved. They actually read it, and I don't think some people did not understand what he was getting at, because we got all kinds of funny comments on there. People coming on and saying, you know, you're being anti-intellectual, you're being this, you're being that. Why can't you understand that there are certain different people using like funky buzzwords with us? There are different psychological anthropologies, brother, that you need to understand. I was like, well, man, come back to me when we learn some English, man. It's like
psychological anthropologies.
Yeah, we're using funky terms. Or was it sociological anthropologies? Some guy had this word, something anthropologies, that he really liked using, kept coming back on and using it.
This question regarding salvation, I just want to get into that with you, because when I refuted the study Quran, I think a lot of new Muslims, they find it difficult to understand how their ancestors would be going hellfire. This is how certain people term this as being, they're going to hellfire, meaning as if we know.
Yeah.
But when you study traditional Sunni Kalam, Bulugh al-Da'wah is one of the conditions that the religion of Islam reached them.
Yeah.
So many of our ancestors and your ancestors, meaning we don't know who the message of Islam reached. People living in Middle Ages England, we don't know what message of Islam reached them. So salvation is something that goes beyond our understanding, meaning on the Day of Judgment, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resurrects people who died in the plague,
Yeah.
bubonic plague. How many of them will achieve salvation? We do not know.
Yeah.
So, but some new Muslims have a crisis of faith,
Yeah.
of reconciling the verses that tell us that the kuffar khalidina fiha, they will remain in the hellfire, and the disbelievers, they are condemned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they don't know how to make a compatibility of those verses and their own experience. So that leads them to finding a congruency in the study Quran, or relating to the study Quran.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned to you earlier, some of them make a correlation between condemnation of other tenets of other groups, or and violence.
Yeah.
Likewise, some of them make a correlation between affirming those verses of the Quran as what they mean, but at the same time understanding the depth behind individual salvation.
Yeah.
Because in Aqidah we learn that individual salvation, individual damnation cannot be stated by a human being regarding another human being, unless it's mansus ali, meaning stipulated in the Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah.
Otherwise we don't know the actual end of an individual. We just judge on the apparent.
Exactly. That's all we're responsible for.
So this emotional baggage that they have. So Rachel Corrie, when she died in Palestine, at that time, one of the Anglosphere scholars did say that if Rachel Corrie is not in paradise, I am in the wrong religion. Words to that effect.
Okay.
So when Rachel Corrie died, I think she was killed by an Israeli.
Was it a bulldozer? She was
a bulldozer. Yeah. Now, for that scholar to have said that, and this is the same scholar who said regarding the Qadianis, I believe he was emotionally overwhelmed at the time.
Yeah.
But like I said to you, lack of depth of theological issues sometimes may make these people say such statements.
Okay. Well,
because if he had depth, he would have known if Rachel Corrie will have individual salvation, Allah knows best. But we judge on the apparent of a deen, of a religion, that we're not permitted to pray a funeral prayer or supplicate for her, but individual salvation is known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what he should have said.
Yeah.
But by saying, if Rachel Corrie is not going to paradise, then I am in the wrong religion. So when this individual rushes to those type of statements, his followers then jump on the bandwagon. Because at the time when I refuted him on the Qadianis, his followers went on the internet and posted, if such and such scholar is saying this, it must be correct. That scholar then retracted. So he retracted, but where do his followers stand?
Yeah.
And additional to that, it also shows us the harms of blind faith and blind conformity in belief. So these are some of the reasons why I believe these people accept the study Quran, because they can't make a compatibility between coming from a disbelieving background, but which is not something new to us.
Yeah.
When I say us, I mean migrants, because people who migrated from the Indian subcontinent prior to partition, there were many non-Muslims living in what is termed as being Pakistan today, and many of them were reverts. This term reverts, by the way, you discuss. You despise the word reverts. So many of them were new Muslims in India and Pakistan. But they never had a crisis of salvation of their ancestors. But this seems to be a crisis of faith in the Anglosphere, where there is a crisis of faith issue regarding salvation of ancestors and salvation of parents and salvation. I had a neighbor here, Sheila, an old woman. She was in her 90s and she died. Now Sheila was a Jehovah's Witness. Prior to that, she was a Catholic. Then she became a Jehovah's Witness. Then she got to know me. Now Sheila was my neighbor, and she would preach to me every day, and I would convey to her the message of Islam. But Sheila did not have the ability to comprehend what is being said to her. because of her old age. Now, when Sheila died, regarding her individual salvation, what will I say? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Because Al-Imam al-Hashimi, rahimahullah, the Shaykh of Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Shaghuri, rahimahullah, in his book Sharh Nazmi Aqidati Ahli Sunnah, he places 10 conditions for the mukallaf. I have the book here somewhere. He places 10 conditions for the mukallaf, and some of them are like the mukallaf, meaning the person who's tasked to accept Islam, he must be discerning. Cannot be in a state of negligence. So now when we apply that on individuals, our problem is resolved, that Allah knows best. But as a general, we are told to say kuffar are going to hell. And then you have the question of eternal punishment, which is not something new. The question, because Ibn Taymiyyah ascribed to that view according to some scholars, even though some say he was free from that belief, but Al-Imam Subki refuted him on that. So I believe this study Quran phenomenon, as well as perennialism, some of this comes down to salvation. I don't know what you have to say regarding that.
All right, not to go over everything you said there. Long statement, mashallah. Okay, I think the first thing goes back to, I think I would start with something brilliant that Imam al-Ghazali said in Kitab al-Tawheed wa Tawakkul from Ihya al-Muddin, whereas he said that innovation, he said, how does innovation start? He said innovation always starts when you are studying the Quran, or you're studying Islamic theology or fiqh or something, and you come across something that does not sit well with you, it doesn't sit easy with you, and you find it difficult to reconcile to. And he said at that point you have two options. Either you study until you understand it. That's option number one. Option number two, you innovate. You just change it. And again, so this problem that people have with salvation, with, okay, are my parents not saved, my grandparents not saved, and so on and so forth. What all these points that you've mentioned, absolutely, that's true. We don't talk about individuals. You can't, the individual salvation. But again, we're not responsible for that. We judge by the outward. This is why, for example, I find it really amazing that the Prophet ﷺ would allow the companions to pray over munafiqun. Like, he knew what the munafiqun were, but there were munafiqun who were being prayed over.
Until the abrogation came.
So Hudayf bin al-Yaman, like, he knew who they were. There's a story of Hudayf bin al-Yaman. He was Sahab al-Sir. He knew who the munafiqun were. So Umar ibn Khattab would follow him around. Right? So he's like, is Hudayfa going to the janazah today? Oh, he's not going. Maybe that's because of, he knows this guy's secret. So we're not responsible. So if we pray over someone, we pray over someone who outwardly is a Muslim but is inwardly a munafiq, we're not to blame, because we don't know. If someone dies as a Muslim but outwardly to us they were an unbeliever, and we don't pray over them and bury them, that's not our fault, because we're not to know. I find it quite fascinating, because I think it also leads into this issue, because even with a term like kafir, like, people get wary of that. They say, don't call him a kafir, call him a non-Muslim, because you don't know, like, how he's going to die. You don't know what's in his heart. I was like, well, I don't know what's in his heart, but outwardly he's a kafir, and kafir is a theological designation. It's not an insult. It's not a derogatory term. It depends how you use it. It's like fire. You can use fire to destroy. You can use fire to make tea. It's not an inherently derogatory, harmful thing. So these people will say, don't say kafir, say non-Muslim. But I could say in response, okay, I'll call you a non-kafir. I don't know how you're going to end up. I don't know what's in your heart. So we're responsible for the outward. That's one thing we have to understand. Secondly, when talking about Allah's justice, you see, this is another thing I find with the premise. There was one of them, there was Martin Lings, who had some issue with, he'd say something like, why is it when the Muslim conquest, the Futuhat, why is it that they got to Spain and didn't go any further? Why didn't it go on to France and Germany and England, and those people didn't receive the message? You think, well, isn't Allah most just? Like, you just mentioned these points now about Balugha Dawah, the message has to reach them. Allah is most just. Why are you so worried about?
It seems to me they don't
believe
basic kalam.
Yeah, they don't understand that Allah is most just. Like, why are you worried about? Like, oh, they didn't get the message. Will Allah treat them fairly? What kind what kind of question is this? It doesn't.
But Martin Lings was treated by these people as a saint, meaning even though he was a perennialist.
Yeah, he had these funky ideas. But I think what people don't get...
and he was associated with some of the earlier perennialists.
like Frithiop Schuon and...
Yeah, and these people were into... They were into some bizarre things, weren't they?
Yeah.
Meaning things that go beyond our discussion.
Yeah, we'll have to sit down again for that. But one of the things I think people don't understand is innamal a'malu binniyat, right? That actions are according to intentions. The first hadith in the Arba'in Nawawiyya, it's like, obviously, because we're doing a translation of a sharh right now, and it's one of the pillars of the faith, that understanding that hadith.
With regard to that, some people ask a common question they ask me is, Princess Diana was such a good person, she did so much for charity, Mother Teresa and being another one. By the way, they died on the same day. And then you have Muslims who commit injustice and whatnot. So how I respond to that is by saying intention. If a Muslim does a good act with the wrong intention, the Muslim is not rewarded. So if I give £10 to a poor person out of ostentation, I will not be rewarded for giving that £10. So if a non-Muslim does a good action, firstly, who are they doing the action for? And secondly, are they not rewarded on earth? So these simple kind of objections have a simple response. But for some reason, there's many young people, and not only young people, these intellectuals as well, like Martin Lings and others, who seem troubled by these type of questions, and they end up with a crisis of faith, where they end up innovating things into deen, whether that's in belief or whether it's in practice. So belief in terms of perennialism, or believing Lahori Qadianis are believers, or so many other things. But in fiqh, where they find the fiqh too difficult to practice also. And this is what's leading to a crisis of faith for many young people in the UK and in the US and other places, where they either will remain as Muslim, but they will innovate into the religion in belief or practice, and in some cases some of them leave the religion.
Because, but to get to this point, what people don't get, again, because you're saying it's about intention. So I think Imam Shara mentioned this in his tafsir as well. He said, you look at these people who have done beneficial things for humanity, whether it's Princess Diana or a scientist who discovered some medicine or so on and so forth. But the question is, who do they do it for? Right? If they did it for people rewarded them. People gave them a memorial holiday. People gave them a statue in the park, whatever it was. They were rewarded. So what does Allah owe them? I think one example I've used sometimes when teaching people, to give a simple example so that viewers have something to use. I mean, for example, if you and I, let's say we're the same age, and we leave school, we leave university, and we start work, right? I work for company A, you work for company B. And every month we get our salary and we pay something into our pension. And that we just do that every month. We pay into our pension, we work for salaries. We do that all the way through to retirement age, okay? So we're going to retire at the age of 65. In the last few months of work, my company goes bust. My company goes bankrupt, my pension disappears, my retirement goes. Your company B, you finish, you get your retirement payments, you get your pensions, you're set for life. I'm struggling. Can I therefore go to your company and say, give me a pension? Look, I worked all these years. I spent 40 years working in this company. I worked really hard. What are they going to say? Company B is going to say, you didn't work for us. Sorry. I understand you worked hard. I'm not denying that. It just wasn't for us. We don't owe you anything. It's really that simple.
Did you read any of Guy Eaton's works? The King of the Castle.
I think I read, what was it?
Man and Islam and the Destiny of Man.
Yeah, I think I read a bit of that.
So if you read these works and then you read some of Martin Ling's works, because these were like the pioneers for some of the new Muslim scholars and new Muslims who are scholars in the West.
Yeah.
These guys were like the pioneers for them. So that mindset, meaning that way of thinking, has trickled down, filtered down into the mindset of some of the du'at, the callers that we have now in the West.
Yeah.
Whether they realize it or not.
Yeah.
But that mindset has also trickled down from the du'at into the mindset of children of immigrants and other Muslims living here, meaning who won't have they won't look back to scholars from Darul Islam.
Yeah.
Meaning many of the younger people, meaning me and you are young, but we're relatively young because there's people younger than us in their 20s and teenagers. They won't relate to scholars like the scholars that we've mentioned, meaning Imam Sha'rawi died in 96, I think.
98.
Yeah, 98 or 96. Or Al-Imam Muhammad Sa'id, or Sheikh Wahba Zuhaili, or Sheikh Nuruddin Itr, or so many other scholars, meaning the Muslim world has so many ulama who we would deem as being authoritative. But because they are unable to relate to them, they relate to du'at, callers, who are, some of them are mutamakkinin in their knowledge, they have knowledge, but the knowledge is not the problem. Meaning knowledge is accessible. It is one of the ashratu sa'a in akhiru zaman. Knowledge will be accessible. The problem here relates more to ikhlas and spirituality, meaning the ruhaniya of Islam, the ruh of Islam. But how do we get to the essence of the spirituality of Islam? I asked Sayyid Abbas bin Alawi rahimahullah ta'ala regarding this, and he said to me that the sir, the secret is a sidq. A sidq, meaning sidq, truthfulness with Allah. So when there is an absence of sidq, everything else is absent. And when a sidq is there, truthfulness with Allah, then a person is steered in the right direction. So what do you think with the new generation, meaning irrelevant to whether you think Islam will remain in the Anglosphere or not, in the long term? And I will go on to the subject of Al-Imam Al-Mahdi radiallahu anh after this, but in the long term, what is the essence that is needed by people?
Well, I think that's absolutely true, to have sidq with Allah, to be sincere with Allah, because I think that I've seen this in quite a few people recently. You talk to people, if you get into a situation where you're being pressured to do something that you know contradicts revelation, right? You know that I can't do this because Allah has not commanded it or Allah has prohibited it, so I'm not supposed to do this. If you then go ahead and do it, it's going to, you're going to feel it inside you.
Affect you spiritually.
It's going to affect you spiritually. You're going to feel, it's going to hurt you on the inside, like almost like physiologically, it's going to hurt you, and that is going to lead to
spiritual elements.
Yeah, it's going to lead to depression. It can just lead to depression.
So spirituality is interlinked with guidance.
Yeah, exactly.
Hidayah. But eventually a person gets to a stage where it no longer hurts the spirit. And a person accepts it, and then they change the ruling or change it and make it something acceptable. Isn't that the case? Yeah, well that could be the istidraj. I mean, that's just like meaning imtihan from Allah, a test from Allah.
Yeah, it's a test from Allah. Because I think if people are, if you are in that sort of state where you can see maybe it's your culture that's contradicting your revelation, and that's troubling you in your heart, that's probably a good sign that you've got that in you, that is troubling you, and that therefore you need to act according to that and fight. But if you don't, you're going to be...
Conclusion of our discussion, I just want to mention 3 things before finishing. One is Al-Imam Abdullah Sirajuddin rahimahullah ta'ala of Halab, in one of his books, I think the work Su'udul Aqwal, he mentions a dua, and I want to mention this dua for all our viewers and everyone else so they may benefit, is a dua that protects you from fitna, tribulation, because we live in ayyam al-fitan, zaman al-fitan, tribulations, is Allahumma rabban nabiyyi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam اغفر لي ذنبي وأذهب غيظ قلبي وأجرني من مضلات الفتن ما أحييتني يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. This is from the Sunnah. He sources this from the works of Hadith, that if someone recites this regularly, they will be protected from tribulations. And our tribulations are three types. One is in belief. The second is in fiqh, practice of fiqh. And the third would be, even if a person is not affected in the iman and the fiqh, meaning bid'ah in religion, it would affect their worldly life.
Yeah.
Meaning you can have tribulation in anything in your worldly life. This is one point I wanted to mention. The second one was regarding this book over the... Can you just...
Which one is it?
This one. Yeah, that one.
This one?
Yeah, so this particular author, he wrote on purification of the heart.
Yeah.
So this is purification of the heart, signs, symptoms and cures of the spiritual diseases of the heart. Translation and commentary of Imam al-Mawlud's Ma'faratul Qulub by Hamza Yusuf.
Yeah.
So people are writing on the issues of spiritual elements of.
Yeah.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best of people's intentions. So we're not being judgmental regarding intentions, but like you said, we judge on the apparent and the outward. Husnul Khatima, meaning a good ending.
Yeah.
We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a Husnul Khatima and give these people also good Husnul Khatima in accordance with their intention and their sidq with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I just want to mention this book because it's on the ailments of the heart. A third book I wanted to show was this one, the third from your right. Yeah, that one. Because we have no time regarding the subject of al-Imam al-Mahdi radiyallahu anhu. This book, Iqtud Durar fi Akhbar al-Muntazar. Now this is a Sunni book, even though the Shia have their own edition of the work.
Okay.
So this is the Darul Minhaj edition. Have you seen this edition?
No, I have not seen that, no.
So you live in Jeddah currently. Darul Minhaj is based
Yeah, I've been to them many times. I haven't seen the copy.
You've never seen this?
No.
So this is by Al-Imam Yusuf bin Yahya bin Muhammad bin Ali al-Maqdisi al-Sulami al-Shafi'i. Passed away in the year 658.
Okay.
So it's a very early work. Now the reason why I'm mentioning this is you must have heard of my conversation with the deviant on the descent of Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salam and the end of times, a local mufti.
Okay.
Now he denied the descent of Isa alayhi salam and said all the ahadith are forged.
Yeah.
Even though scholars have compiled so many hadith, Sheikh Abdullah Siddiq Al-Ghumari rahimahullah alone compiles over 60 hadith. I mean, I have his work somewhere, over 60 hadith, and then from the commentaries of the Quran. But according to him, all the hadith are forgeries, and they were forged by people who had accepted Islam from Christianity. So they were Christians, they accepted Islam and innovated the belief in the return of Jesus.
Yeah. This
was his theory. Now, this person, he doesn't ascribe to any legal theory or what we would call qawa'id tafsir al-nusus, a method of understanding texts, or the mustalah al-hadith, the technical method of hadith verification and checking the authenticity of a hadith and its veracity and then interpreting it correctly. Initially he claimed to be Maliki, but then these people evolve into creatures that just have their own method. I mean, what suits them, they will change. Meaning there's no fixed method. But likewise, some people now, well, not only recently, in previous times as well, have said regarding the belief in al-Imam al-Mahdi radiyallahu anhu, firstly that the ahadith are forged, number one, and number two, that it's an innovated belief that was introduced in the Abbasi period. So during the Abbasi rule, people were living under the climate of the Abbasi rulers that not all of them were bad people, meaning Harun Rashid was an exceptionally very good ruler. But because of this, they forged hadith, and they claim that all the narrators are from Kufa and other types of claims. But this book, Iqd al-Durar, he compiles in this work over 400 narrations.
Okay. So
400 hadith. So let's say, for argument's sake, 390 hadith are forged.
Yeah.
10 hadith will be sahih.
Yeah.
From 400,
Yeah.
at least 10 will be sahih, but that's not the case. You'll find that the number of sahih hadith are so many, exceed the odd 10 or 20 hadith, 400 hadith. So for our viewers,
Yeah.
I think because you're into translations as well,
Yeah.
this is something to look into,
Okay.
Durar, and maybe you can also place a modern commentary on some of the ahadith on the Ashrat Sa'a. Also Sheikh Abu Bakr Mashhur,
Okay.
who lives in Jeddah.
Okay.
He's from the Habaib.
Yeah.
He has very good works like Al-Usas wal-Muntaliqat.
Yeah. Okay.
Al-Usas wal-Muntaliqat. Inshallah, I'll show you the book later, inshallah.
Inshallah.
These are the last few things I wanted to mention.
Okay.
Anything else you want to mention before we finish?
Yeah, I think as a final thing, I think obviously in terms of availability of the book, that it is available on lulu.com, it's available on amazon.com. We can put the links below. I also have a podcast from last year where I talk about the book as well, but I also talk about the reasons behind writing the book, so for viewers to look at that. I think also one thing maybe we should finish on is also, I think a lot of people have noticed, I saw this today, people jumped to the last chapter about will Islam survive in the West? And now what I'm putting forward here is I think that Muslims who want to really protect their faith and cling on to their faith and not have to compromise it, not have to water it down, whether it's in creed or fiqh or anything else, they're going to have to be out of the mainstream. They're not going to be part of these national organizations. They're not going to be working with mainstream institutions at all. They're going to be to the side, kind of out of sight, out of mind, if they don't make hijrah.
The thing is with that, with Darul Islam as well, as we move to, we are living in Akhiru Zaman, in the end of times, and the Ashratu Sa'a are visible. In Darul Islam also, the fitan increase.
Yeah.
So within Darul Islam, when the Prophet ﷺ foretold nikahur rajuli ar-rajula,
Yeah.
a man will marry a man, meaning openly, it's not only referring to the Anglosphere, it's referring to Darul Islam. Meaning these signs will occur in the end of time. So we have rulers like Muhammad bin Salman, who have plans for even the place, the holy cities of Makkah al-Mukarramah, meaning opening cinemas and changing the scope of Islam in the Hijaz and other places. Meaning these masa'ib will increase. Even though I agree that the person's iman is stronger and preserved, but this brings us to another subject, inshallah, for another time, regarding Akhiru Zaman.
Yeah.
That we live now in the Akhiru Zaman, and this is something people need to realize. And the ahadith of Ashratu Sa'a, people need to read the ahadith.
Yeah.
So even in something like Mishkatul Masabih, they need to read Kitabul Fitan.
Yeah.
And realize that the fitan will affect the iman of individuals, meaning belief. So it's a time to preserve our iman, irrelevant to where we live, because globalization is everywhere.
Yeah.
You have people living in the villages, but they will have smartphones, and they will access everything that we will be able to access here in the West.
Yeah.
Meaning ideologically, and some of the scholars have said, أن تلد الأمة ربتها. One of the meanings of that is the change of the way people think.
Yeah. Well, there's the inqilab al-umur.
Yeah.
Things get inverted.
Will change.
Get introverted.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, this book I would recommend for people who are in da'wah and anyone who is thinking about accepting Islam. They should read this book, The Big Step, How to Survive Islam in the Anglosphere. There are a few things that I do disagree with, but not on a disagree in a minor way, which I will discuss with him off camera, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable you to do additional work and focus on additional work, inshallah.
Inshallah, Ameen. Okay, so we will finish there, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Muhammad al-Alamin wa sallallahu ala Rasulillah.
Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.